today, but thanks for joining, everyone. I know that you're probably on your 14th Zoom meeting for the day. So I appreciate you spending some more time here with us today. I'm going to move quite quickly through a bunch of content. There's quite a bit to get through, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. And as you're going, feel free to post questions into the chat window. There's a little chat icon that'll open up a text chat. We'll be keeping track of those, both to try and get to in the Q&A, but also as we look at what a next follow-up session might look like, where we could dive deeper, where we could provide more insight, we'll be happy to do that. So the session today is the Ideal Work From Home Toolkit. These are practices and tools for adapting to the new normal. We know that this new normal won't be forever, but it's definitely something we're getting used to for the time being. I just want to thank Christina and Dawn from the Werk and the Werk Net for co-hosting this with us, and we're just really excited to be doing this. So welcome, everyone. So just to start things off, because we've all been in a day, I just want to take a quick second and breathe with you for a moment and have everybody just, if you want to participate, you can. If you don't feel like it, that's totally fine too. But I'd love everybody to just, for a moment, just to get seated kind of as comfortably as possible. And if it's possible, to get your feet flat on the ground. And so just sort of square your body up and relax your shoulders and relax your hands. Your hands can just be loose in your lap. Some people like to put their hand on their belly or their chest as they're breathing. And all we're going to do is we're going to breathe in, we're going to hold at the top, and then we're going to release. And I'm just going to do a few of those with us all together, just to ground into this moment here. So let's breathe in together. And hold. And release. And on this breath, just see if you can notice your heartbeat somewhere in your body. Breathe in. And hold. And breathe out. Let's do one more. We'll breathe in. And hold. And release it all out slowly. So one of the things that happens when we are in a digital environment, as much as we are right now with our work and with our entertainment and with our social interactions, and so much of that happening, is we actually lose track of our physical body. So the first thing, and we'll talk about it a little more, is just finding moments to catch up with your body and just to breathe. I have a note on my computer right now that it just says, remember to breathe. There's actually something called email apnea, where they've shown that when you're writing emails or when you're communicating through text, you often hold your breath. And that can be really hard on our brains and our nervous system. So that's a really simple practice. It takes about 1 minute. You could do it before meetings or any other time. So quickly about me, I'm a lot of things. I'm an entrepreneur, coach, philosopher, futurist, researcher, investor, musician, and I'm passionate about helping people expand consciousness and to discover their full potential. And the goal of that really is to transform the world. I think that the change that's necessary in the world starts within us. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And just some really quick background on me. I'm the founder of BrightWeb, which is a social impact agency. We have people working in 30 cities around the world. We've been remote for over 5 years. So I've done a lot of research on distributed remote teams. I've been in the digital space for close to 20 years. I'm old. More recently, I'm the founder and CEO of Nature of Work, which is a performance and wellness company, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. But that was really born out of my own need for habits and the things that we'll talk about today, but also seeing that across my team and others as we're moving more into a digital space. So I have deep expertise in remote work, culture, leadership, technology, performance and wellness, and personal transformation. So that's just quickly about me. so you know who you're listening to a bit. And all of what we're talking about today is basically very small snippets from Nature of Work, which is a personal operating system to upgrade your performance, resilience, and well-being. Now, this was designed before all of this was happening, but it's very, very timely in terms of everyone adapting to a completely new routine and schedule. It basically goes through, it's a 7-week program that you go through, and it goes through everything from your morning routine and how you start your day, which we'll talk a little bit about today, taking control and reclaiming sovereignty over your time and attention. So looking at how we use technology and the bonds we build with them and how to reset those a bit. A lot of neuroscience around focus and attention and how our minds work and the cycles of our brains and our energy and how to get the most out of our time so that we can actually work less and produce more with higher quality. And we do work around priorities, which we'll talk about today, and setting an agenda for yourself, basically really owning your time as much as possible. We talk about creativity, which is a different type of focus, basically a soft focus, and how to create the space for deeper thinking. And we do work on sleep. So when you go through the program, you're basically adding various practices and things that you're adding to your lifestyle and tweaking things and measuring them and seeing how they work over the course of about 7 to 9 weeks, basically. So the program is partly in a workbook. So a lot of it is offline. And then there's an online component that you basically go through modules of content each week. It's about 45 minutes of content a week. And then there's resources like yoga and meditation and things like that. We're actually going to send a link out to everyone who signed up for this with a link to our meditations and the yoga practices if they're helpful for you right now. And I don't know if Chantel from The Well is on this call today with us, but she's a friend of ours. She's a friend of the Works. And she actually did the yoga videos with us. So that's kind of fun. She's on there. And Yasmin, who's on this call with us today, she did the exercise video as well. So that's a little background on me and the work we do. Today we're here because there's obviously a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the world right now that's causing a lot of anxiety. It's basically just raising the underlying stress level, the kind of baseline stress level that we're all managing with right now. And on top of that, our regular routines have been completely disrupted. And everyone's scrambling to figure out this work from home thing. Even if you work from home, being confined to your home is a new thing, and having no separation is a new thing. We're online all the time. So I keep talking about living in 2D because there's actually research showing, that we don't really perceive things the same way as we do in 3D. We're designed for 3D, but we're living in 2D right now, which is challenging for us. And then our in real life social engagement is heavily reduced, which is really hard on us psychologically, emotionally. So we're coping with a lot right now. And what that's causing is a lot of disruption to the way, and I think for most people on this call, we're lucky enough likely to still have work and to be employed and to be moving forward in that respect. But it makes it really hard with all this underlying stress to even think about how to do that efficiently or effectively. So today we're going to talk about slowing down, and I'll talk about that in a couple different ways. How to structure our time a bit. So thinking about the cycles of our work and the structure to our day. Talking just a bit about setting priorities, and we'll get into that. And also creating routines, because one of the hardest things is having all of our routines broken suddenly and just kind of rethinking those. So we'll talk about how to do that in a confined environment, basically. And for anybody just joining, feel free to answer or ask any questions or put comments in the group chat. We'll be checking all those out, both for the Q&A period as well as for a follow-up to this session. So this is my ugliest slide, I apologize, but I wanted to talk quickly about the 3 brains because it's really relevant to what we're talking about today. So the brain is much more complex than this, but we can think about it in 3 simple pieces. We have the thinking brain, the cortex, which is the newest part of our brain. It's about 2.5 million years old, fresh and new. We have the emotional brain, which is the limbic brain, and it's about it's a bunch older than that. And then we have the stress brain, which is about 250 million years older. You've often maybe heard of the lizard brain, the reptilian brain, but that's the amygdala. And what's happening right now is that we are receiving a ton of information about threats happening in our environment, whether they're directly in our personal space or whether they're just happening in the world. And even if we are, clear on the fact that, in our homes we are safe right now, our amygdala is freaking out. Our stress brain is receiving those signals and it doesn't really process them very well. It's 250 million years old. It wasn't really built for this environment, and it's creating a ton of stress. And what happens when the amygdala kind of flares up is it affects the nervous system. So it affects our digestion, it affects our ability to sleep, it affects our hormone production. It also affects the brain. So the cortex, our thinking brain, our ability to respond, and to think and to process, and plan and do all those kind of regular things that we go about in our lives, it gets harder. So if you've ever imagine a time when, maybe it's just right now, but if there's another time when you've been in a very stressful moment and you really couldn't figure out how to solve the problem, but you looked back on it a couple days later when you'd relaxed and you realized how easy the solution was. And that's an example just of the amygdala really taking over the brain. And so a lot of what we'll talk about today is just ways to offset that and to get back in a bit of control over the way our brain is working and our nervous systems are working. So the first piece around rewiring the mind. So right now, the first thing I want to talk about is just the amount of information that's coming at us. And if you're in the US with us today, it's even more intense than where I am in Canada. There's probably a few folks in Europe. It's kind of varies depending on the sort of news media system where you are, but there's a similarness in the sense that there's just a tremendous amount of information. Everyone's trying to figure out this is kind of an unprecedented moment, but there is relevant information that you need to check in on. Bottom line is, though, we don't need to be checking in on it every hour, and maybe not even every day at this point, depending on where you are and who you are. There could be some factors that you're checking in on, but I think we need to really think about how we're doing that. And just to remember that the news media companies are all competing for our attention, and the way they do that is making their information seem urgent. What's also happening is like a lot of the same information is just being cycled over and over and over again, and having a different interviewer come on and talk about the same thing and then an opinion about it. And then, so there's not a ton of new information. Of course, the numbers of people that are sick and things are being updated. And I think we need to decide how relevant that is on a hourly versus daily versus every couple of days basis in order for us to just maintain. And we'll talk about how to do that. The unfortunate part about the news media is that they win this attention contest by showing us things that make us mad, sad, or scared. That's why there is no real major news network that's all positive news. We're wired to look for negative information that might be a threat to us. That's just a system we have to keep us safe back when we lived in the jungle. And that's not really the case anymore. So, and as I talked about those three brains, so even when we think we're rationalizing it, because at first I thought, well, I'm just really reading all this news, but I understand that that's somewhere else, and right now where I am, it's pretty safe. The truth is that information is going straight to the amygdala. Our amygdala is freaking out, and we're putting ourselves under more stress than necessary. So the first couple things I'd recommend in this is tuning out the noise. And this to me means scheduling our news check-ins to once a day maximum. I would suggest making it at the end of our workday. Definitely not first thing in the morning. Definitely not last thing before we go to bed. End of the workday seems like a reasonable time before dinner, before we have some time to decompress and actually get some sleep. It doesn't interrupt our workday necessarily. So that's the first thing I would recommend. And there's obviously exceptions to some of this if you're looking for specific info for your small business, looking to see if they've announced new information there. There's some caveats here, but generally, I don't think we need to be checking the news every morning and all day. Second is just similarly reducing social feeds that have links in them. So LinkedIn, Facebook. Again, Facebook's algorithm is designed to surface content that will effectively agitate us in some way or cause a strong reaction in us. That's what gets us to click. That's what gets us to share. And so you got to just be careful a little bit about how these systems work. Second is just to start your day slowly. And what this means to me is no phones first thing in the morning. And I'll say that out of the habits, there's a whole bunch of habits and things that you start doing when you take the Nature of Work program. This is one of the first things we introduced because we've seen it having a huge impact on the rest of your day, just in terms of your ability to manage things that are coming at you and your reactivity. So if you can manage 30 minutes, start with 5 if that feels like a lot, work your way up to 30. It makes a tremendous amount of difference on your brain. Basically, your brain isn't getting a signal first thing when it's just waking up that it needs to be alert and it needs to stay reactive. You're kind of setting yourself off for a day of reactivity if you do that. And then replace that with some kind of morning practices. There's a ton of things you could do, things that are focused inwardly, ideally on your body, on your direct space, on mindfulness. So a meditation practice. Like I said, I'll be sending out some meditations, and we'll send a follow-up email that'll have some links to meditation apps and other stuff. A short gratitude practice. I think even in the midst of feeling like our lives are upside down, there's a lot of things to be grateful for. And so that's something we can do. We can journal, we can do a yoga practice. There's lots of online stuff right now, and we'll be sending out some links to that as well. Simple breathing like we did at the beginning of this, just some deep breaths, even if it's in your bed, just lying and doing some deep breathing. I also find reading a book for 5 or 10 minutes, just a short period, it kind of like tells my brain that, okay, I'm in control of my time, and I find it really helpful. And then for a lot of folks with kids, it is a mindfulness technique to get on the floor and play with your kids and to tune out everything else going on, and do that before you get into your day and get into your work. Last thing, which we already talked about, is just stopping and breathing. So stopping everything, looking out the window, taking a few deep breaths, maybe opening the window and getting some fresh air in. And we didn't quite do that, but the breathing technique I'd recommend is called box breathing, or 4-8-7. It means to breathe in for 4, hold for 8 at the top, and release for 7. It's very powerful and kind of activating the nervous system and just relaxing things. So definitely recommend that. And one thing you could do, like I've done this in my most stressful periods when I've got a huge thing happening. I'll set a timer I'll set alarms that go off every few hours, that like a stop and breathe alarm, or I'll put it in my calendar to actually remind myself to do that. The point of the breathing piece, is really to ground into your body and to get reconnected. And when you focus in on your body, when you sit and just feel your body, feel the weight of your body in the seat, feel your feet on the floor, feel your breathing, feel your heartbeat, it grounds you into the present moment. And to just tell yourself that you are safe in this present moment. In this very moment that we're all here together, we are safe, we are okay. I know there are lots of people having a hard time, and we might be as well, but we are safe in this present moment. So that's just an easy practice, a very easy little mindfulness practice to deploy for yourself. Second thing I'll talk about is finding your rhythm. So this is probably one of the hardest things when you're suddenly working from home, or you've suddenly just the way you work has changed a lot. So our entire lives are on our screens right now. It's hard to decipher, what's right, what's up and down. It's easy to work for 5 or 15 hours straight and just realize you've just been like in a work coma or in a like inbox coma or something like that. It can be very intense right now. So one thing that's interesting is the brain actually works in 90-minute cycles. It's called the ultradian rhythm. It's linked to actually if you've ever heard of our sleep cycles, we go through about a 90-minute sleep cycle. The same thing is happening when we're awake. We basically have peaks and valleys in our concentration, in our basically mental energy. So what that means really is that when we try to work for 4 hours straight without a break, we're really working against our own system, and we're going to find periods in there where our brain actually just needs a couple of minutes to relax, and we'll come back way stronger, and we'll get a lot more done, and we'll actually be a lot calmer. So that's just something a lot of people don't know about how the brain cycles. So what we're going to talk a little bit about is breaking up our work into blocks, which just significantly improve the quality of the work and how we feel throughout the day. So specifically, we have a technique we just talk about as focus blocks. These are 30 to 90-minute blocks of time where you're focused on one thing only. So being in the digital environment, it means that our inbox is always near us. It means that all of the notifications, our Slack or Microsoft Teams or whatever other notification attack we have coming at us are all in the place where we're trying to get work done. So to focus on one thing means to actually shut everything else off, to turn off notifications. Both Microsoft, like both Windows and Mac, have easy ways to basically mute notifications, but to focus either like anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes on a single thing. And that means no notifications, no multitasking. This has a huge impact, not only on like what we can actually get done, but it has a huge impact on how our brain feels, like actually how we feel. Multitasking actually raises our stress markers pretty dramatically. So as we're already in a stressful situation right now, focusing in on a single thing at a time can help us to feel calmer overall. And then we'll talk about what good rest is, but take a good rest break every cycle. So if they're 30-minute cycles, just take a 5-minute break after. If it's 90 minutes, you might want to take 10 or 15 minutes. But that something that involves, water, like drinking water, getting up and moving around, opening the window or getting outside if you're able to for a short walk, something social. So maybe calling a friend or whatnot, or just something in 3D, reading a book, working on a puzzle, sketching, whatever you've got around the house. Figure out some activities that are 3D, that are kind of tangible, that you can feel in your hands. And I'll talk a little bit more about good rest in a sec. The other thing in terms of finding a rhythm with your work is to think about batching and scheduling the clutter. So what I mean by the clutter, it's a bit of a derogatory term, but I mean the email, the Slack messages, maybe the admin stuff, the small stuff that needs to get done. So thinking about how to batch that into sections rather than having an always on mentality. So one of the things we've fallen into really as a working society is that our Slack is always on, our email is being checked 80 times a day. And so we're kind of constantly, part of our mind is constantly being pulled into those areas and other things that we're trying to do. So instead, think about setting specific times. If your work involves a lot of communications, maybe it's 5 times a day you check your email. If you have a more creative role that doesn't require as much communications, maybe it's once or twice a day. But setting a time in your calendar and the rest of the time having those notifications off. I think a huge part of it is turning the notifications off on our phones. I don't have any email notifications or Slack or any of those things on my phone. I find that if there's some relevant information, I'll get it when I need it. Or if there's something I'm looking for, I'll go look for it. But I don't need notifications everywhere all the time. Similarly, creating admin blocks for the smaller stuff. So you might have go do a booking or, file some documents or update a spreadsheet or things like that. Create specific times where you just check off the small stuff on the list. And we'll talk about keeping a list in a moment, but having a running list and then just knowing that you've got a section of your day to do that, again, it lowers the background stress that your mind is feeling about all those little things that need to make sure they get done. So creating a specific times a day to do that. And I know we've got a few teams here. I don't know how many folks showed up from the Capilano team, but a whole bunch of folks signed up and a whole bunch of folks from SFU and other great companies. But one thing you could do right now, and I'll just mention right now that I'm also available to do group webinars on just coordinating with the whole team, because I think a lot of what we're talking about here is stuff that you can do individually, but a lot of it also requires your team to understand and maybe to play along and to work with you. But one thing we can do here is just to coordinate with our colleagues right now. Everyone's been thrown into this right now, and if you feel like you're on Zooms all day, so does everyone else in your company. And to look for specific meeting times each day. So maybe it's like a 2 to 4 window that we just know that's when we try to book meetings in. And the rest of the time we try to keep available for actually getting our work done. Again, depending on the type of your role, that could be major parts of your day or very small parts of your day. And last thing here, which I can't see because it's blocked. Something about scheduling. Oh, yeah, this is just scheduling your personal life the same way you do your work. So the other thing that's happening right now is work is bleeding into our personal lives in a major way. I put my personal stuff in my calendar. So I have a weekly, family meeting with my wife that's in my calendar on a Monday. Things that I need to do for myself, they're in the calendar, even in the evenings. Just so when your calendar, if you use your calendar like I do for work, it sort of takes over. But what it means is it basically floods out anytime you have your personal stuff. So you need to be blocking in your personal stuff as well. hope that's what that bullet says. I'll keep moving though. Oh, thanks, Brooke. Brooke's helping me out. So real quick, what is good rest? And not all of this is super possible right now, but good rest means, so when you're actually going to take a break, it means getting off devices and off technology. It means doing something physical if you can. You don't need to do all of these at once. You'd be like a circus performer if you try to do all of these at once. But adding these things to your routine. So something physical, maybe just some stretching, maybe just walk around the house or the apartment, do some jumping jacks, whatever, something physical. Creative arts is a great way to shift modalities. Again, it's tangible. You're doing something with your hands. So that could be art or music, instruments, whatever you've got, tapping on the table if you want to just like jam with yourself. But doing something tangible it activates different parts of the brain. And again, it gives the cortex part of your brain, the part that's trying to do all this cognitive thinking, this prefrontal cortex, it gives it a chance to relax. And social is really important right now. And I know I think for all of us, we're probably talking to our friends more, which is great, and reaching out to people. So just making sure that when you're doing that, you're really focusing into the conversation, because I think it's very easy right now to be on calls and to also be flipping through something or feeling distracted. So we really get the most out of our social interactions when we're focused deeply and the conversations are going somewhere deep. So to think about that, and then as much as possible, obviously, to be getting outdoors. I know that for folks in dense cities right now, that feels scary and a bit limiting. So whatever you can do there, but I think even opening your window, making sure that you're cycling the oxygen in your apartment is a really key thing right now. Next, we'll talk about defining what's important. So this is priority setting. And this is a really key thing, especially when we're in a digital environment all the time. But also that because we're under a lot of stress right now, it can be especially hard to prioritize. Again, when you kind of get into this stress zone, your prefrontal cortex kind of shuts down on you and you can't figure out what to do first. And so when you see people panicking or really freaking out, you see them really making poor choices in that moment. They don't know, they kind of freeze up. Basically, they're going into fight or flight and freeze mode, where the amygdala is taken over, the nervous system is fully amplified, and it's really hard to prioritize. So hopefully some of the things we've talked about already can help to start to bring that stress level down, and we can start to prioritize. But there's some specific practices we'll talk about here. I always like to say, if you don't set priorities for yourself, someone else is going to do it for you. There's an expression, nature abhors a vacuum, which just is basically to say, if there's a space, nature likes to fill it, and systems like to fill it. So if we don't set priorities for ourselves, other people will do it for us. And one of the ways that happens is our email or our Slack. I just like to remind people that email is a public to-do list. Anyone can put stuff on it for you. And so it's really a choice for you when you start your day, if that's where you go first, or whether you go to your own priority list or your own to-do list, and to make sure that you think about what order you're doing that in. It's very easy, again, when we're under stress, to just jump on email and feel like we're being productive by just responding to 40 emails. And sometimes that's necessary, but it's also often not the first thing we should be focused on and the highest value work we could be doing. So prioritization is about determining what's important and then focusing on it in the present moment. So one of the things that happens when we're under stress and we're worrying about the future and all of this uncertainty right now, it lowers our capacity to affect change in this present moment, which is the only moment we have to affect change. And so one of the things I'm reminding my friends, I have folks that are, going through some pretty serious stuff with their businesses and lots of things are, everything is changing right now. So it's really key that you, as much as possible, orient to what you can affect right now. So again, that's when you're setting priorities. You obviously maybe want to make a longer term plan or kind of worst case scenario planning right now if you own a business. But you also need to think about, well, what can I do right now that's going to be proactive, that's going to move everything forward. And so we'll talk about how to set priorities. So again, what can you do right now to have a positive impact? So when you find yourself fluttering around, worrying about what's happening next month, or when is this going to change, or what's going to happen to me by summer, or all those things, continually do your best to just pull yourself back into, okay, it's today. what can I do today to have a positive impact on my work, on my life, on my family, and all those kind of things. So the way that I priority set, and this is a really simplified version for today, there's lots of ways to do this with various tools like Asana or Trello or project management kind of tools. But the basic idea that I run with is this idea of 3 lists. One is an all the things list. And this could be multiple lists. It could be multiple boards on a project management thing. If you're doing different, different aspects of your life. I have a couple of different businesses. I have a few different projects. So I have multiple boards where I've basically put everything I can think of that needs to get done. But that can be really overwhelming and hard on the mind. So the second piece is to then build a this week list, which has 3 to 5 things on it. And I'll talk about kind of how to do that in a sec. But narrowing down all the things list to what are the 3 to 5 things that I want to get done this week, and separating those things so that you're not feeling overwhelmed by all the things list and having to look at so many things throughout your whole week. And finally, on a daily basis, what are the 1 to 2 things from that this week list? One of those 1 to 2 things that I'm going to do today that's going to move my life or my work forward. This has a tremendous ability to, again, lower the stress because the mind is trying to keep track of all of these things out here. We're already under more pressure than usual. There's already a whole bunch of conditions. So really getting focused in on the things that you're actually going to focus on today allows your mind to relax a bit and to tune out some of the noise. So the way I do this basically is on a Monday morning, I will spend a bit of time first thing of my day, and I'll show you what my calendar looks like in a sec. But I spend a bit of time on a Monday morning looking at my various projects, looking at the different things and where they are, and I'll basically pull out the things that I want to put on the list for this week. So for me, it's usually 3 to 5 things. If if the activities that you do throughout the week might be smaller, you might have more things on that. But if you've got more than 10 things on your week list for the week, it might be too much unless they're really easy to check off. But on a Monday morning, that's what I'll do. So I say no more than 3 to 5. Then on a daily basis, so Tuesday through Friday, I'll just spend about 5 minutes looking at my weekly list. I'll figure out what I'm going to do that day, and I'll block it into my calendar. And this is a really key step, is looking at my calendar. Okay, what have I got planned for today? Have I got any meetings? Where have I got some space? And actually blocking the time in to do that task so that you know that you've scheduled it. Again, so if you've got 2 things for the day, when you're working on the first one, you're not worrying about the second one because you've already got it scheduled in for the day. And I do this before I check my email or anything else. So basically, I go through my morning routine. I wake up, I make some decaf coffee, I do my meditation for the morning, I do my stretching. If I have any extra time after that, I'll read my book for a bit. Often I'm just ready to get into work after that. But basically, the first thing I do is sit down and I look at my weekly list. Or if it's Monday morning, I look at all my lists and I think about what I'm doing and I make my weekly list. It's the first thing I do. It helps me to basically just to orient. And of course, there's going to be things in my email box that I'm going to need to respond to. But I've already set my priorities for the week so that I've got some sense of what is important to me. And I know I'm moving pretty fast through a lot of content here, so I'm trying to make sure we have time for questions. I think the last thing that I want to talk about is just triggers and routines. So a lot of people know this, I think, maybe not, but more than 50% or around 50% of everything that we do is based on habits. So we form habits around so many of the things that we do. If we actually had to think through and make a choice about every single thing we do, we'd just be completely overloaded. And so the way that habits work generally is that we have what's like a reminder or a trigger. So something, whether it's maybe a sound or a time of day or a place or a scent or maybe certain clothing that we wear, whatever those things might be, sets off a trigger, which kind of tells our mind that, okay, it's time for this activity. And when we do that activity, we get some kind of reward, and sometimes it's a negative or positive reward, but we get some kind of response, and that reinforces the habit. So what's happened now is like all of our daily routines are kind of thrown out, or they've definitely changed a lot. And so we need to think about how we can rebuild some new triggers and routines to basically train our mind when it's time to work and when it's time to not work. So as I said, it can be places, they could be activities, it could be music, scent, time of day, other stimulus. So of course, when we look at places, that's one of the biggest triggers that's gone. Walking into our office, walking out our front door. Sometimes it's like just that walk to work or picking up that coffee is like, oh, well, I'm about to get down and get to work. I just picked up my coffee. A lot of those things are gone right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do in the place of that. So as I said, we just need to establish some new signals for the brain. So how do we separate work from home when we're working from home, right? I think that's the kind of key question here. And the first thing, if you're able to, is to set up a space, even if it's a tiny nook in your living room or in your bedroom or wherever, that becomes your work environment. That's where all the work happens. And ideally, nothing else happens while you're sitting in that spot or standing in that spot. This will start to build the trigger that when you're in that area of your home, even if it's a little studio apartment, that little nook is your spot. Chantel says, I just did this 2 days ago. Yeah, I think people are hopefully starting to figure this one out. This is a really key thing to do. And now some people you do not have the space to do this. There's other ways to create specific triggers that say it's time to work. It could be a specific mug that you start using every day. It could be Loretta says, I started wearing work slippers. That's an awesome one. It could be a specific playlist that you put on. You could have like if you have an essential oil mist, you use it specifically to start work. Things like that, and then we'll talk about times a day as well, but just think about what you can do. What's my starting work routine? And similarly, what's my ending work routine, which we'll talk about in a sec. The other thing is just don't work from bed. It's really tempting. It's pretty cozy. It's really important that as we think about triggers, that the bed is a trigger for sleeping, and that we don't confuse our mind about what happens in bed. Bed is about sleeping, having sex, reading books. I don't know in what order, but those three things. And otherwise, try to keep your work out of the bed as much as possible, so that when you do it, and this is especially true if you do have any trouble sleeping. And then lock in your start and stop times for work and be as consistent as possible. One of the things that is most true about human beings is that we work basically on rhythm and based on the light of day, based on the time of day, based on the temperature of the day and where we are, and that our organs actually all have their own rhythm, their own circadian rhythm as well. It's all based on when we eat. So the more we can be consistent about when we're eating, when we're working, and when we're not working, the easier it's going to be to find focus and to also find focus away from work as well. So we've talked about this ritual to start and stop the day. What I mean by that as well, just to add on to this, when you're going to stop your day, what can you do? Because sometimes we're going to take our laptop and we're going to move over to the couch and we're going to watch Netflix, or we're going to do something to try and relax. We're still going to have our computer in our hands. So that hasn't changed. So what can we do to say work is now stopped? And in the book, Deep Work by Cal Newport, he talks about this. He actually has a phrase he says to himself. It says, "My work is now complete." And he says it out loud, and he sounds like a robot and like a goofball, but it helps his brain say, my work is now complete. One of the ways you can also do this is review your daily to-do list, check some things off, maybe set your next day up so that you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing tomorrow. Now my day is over. And I think it's really important to create this separation, because if we're working all the time, our brain doesn't have the chance to relax, to basically to regenerate and to just to get some energy back. What ends up happening is we're working at a lower and lower capacity day over day, and then our days get longer and longer. It's kind of this very tough cycle that we get into. So this is what my calendar looks like, and in Nature of Work, we actually go through how to build this calendar out, and it's different for everybody. But I actually basically block my entire week out in advance. And these are basically empty blocks for different types of work. So you can see I have focus blocks. Well, first off, I have my morning routine blocked in, my opening day ritual of setting my priorities and thinking about what I need to get done. I have a focus block first thing in the morning, kind of before the real workday starts and before everything starts flying. And then I have an admin block to check in my emails and stuff after I've had a chance to do some focused work. Then I have a couple sections throughout the week for open meetings. So what I try to do, and as much as possible, is kind of clarify when I'm available. And so these are set as open times so that they show up as available. They show up as free time when someone's looking at my calendar, one of my colleagues is looking at my calendar. Then I've got my lunches blocked in there, other admin blocks locked in there, my evening, my family time, my making music time, my reading, my having a sauna time. I try to block in as much of this as possible. And I basically create this as a recurring thing that just week over week, that's what my calendar looks like. Now, of course, on a weekly basis, I will say that this ends up changing. And on a bad week, it just explodes. And on a good week, it stays like 60 or 70% like this. And I'll say too that I'm a very creative person. I've always considered myself, like when I've done evaluations on myself, one of the most important needs I have, like in motivation factor, is freedom. So I'm a high freedom guy, and I'll tell you that discipline around this equals freedom. It has a huge difference when you basically get into these consistent routines. It unlocks the ability to just know that you're working and doing different types of things at different times of the day, and just it's amazing how much you get done. I find myself far more creative. Brooke says, just how can you talk more about that? Discipline leads to freedom. As much as we think that creative ideas just come randomly at all times and we just need to basically have no schedule, or, and there's a good expression, a good creative thinks like an artist and works like an accountant. And that's really pointing to the fact that, as much as we, want to imagine ourselves as these free spirits, our bodies love routine. They love cycles. Our minds get very used to specific things happening at specific times if you let them. And so when you start to create these cycles, create these routines, create these triggers throughout your day, it just means that in those blocks of time, you become more creative. You're also spending a lot less time thinking about when I'm going to get stuff done. I find I spend a lot less time worrying about like blocking or scheduling my stuff because it's there for me. So I just find that it basically really frees it up. Brooke, the cell phone idea is genius. Oh, I'm not sure which that one is. Right on. So I'm just going to recap real quick, and then we'll jump in. And we got about 15. We're doing pretty good. But I'm happy to stay on a little longer too to answer questions. So real quick, start your day slowly. We talked about being phone free and internet free for the first bit of your day. Reduce the noise and reclaim your attention. So setting specific times a day when you're actually going to go check in on the news and find out what's going on in the world. It is not your responsibility to try and process every piece of information coming out. We've kind of been conditioned to think that knowing all the facts is A, even possible, and B, going to solve something. Of course, there's relevant information we need. We don't need to know it all the time. We don't need to know it in the moment necessarily. Get grounded in your body. So just look for ways to do that, whether it's a breathing technique, whether it's some meditation, whether it's getting out for a walk with some relaxing music. And the playlist, if you can hear it in the background, is one that I'll send out in the email. I'll send a link to it. So something that's just not distracting so you can ground into your body. So working in focus blocks, one thing at a time, no monotasking, all distractions off, set period of time with a good rest break in between those cycles of work. And so part of doing that means getting away from the always on notifications and batching your communications and administrative work. So figuring out what the right rhythm for you is, depending on the type of work you do. It could mean that you have, if you have a bunch of phone calls to make, there's a 30, 40-minute phone call block every day that you just know you're going to need to make phone calls. Or you have multiple email blocks a day, depending on who you are. Setting weekly and daily priorities makes a huge difference in just getting clear on what is actually important to you. And even if you find like this is difficult at first, it starts to settle in. You start to align your communications with others around it, and it starts to have a pretty big impact. Creating new triggers and signals for when you're going to start and stop work. And just being as consistent as possible with your workday. So I just want to reiterate this. When we're stressed, we cannot think clearly. It's just a physical reality that it's very hard to think under stress. Certain folks really build a resilience to this, but in general, when we have prolonged kind of chronic stress that we're experiencing right now, it can be really tough on our brains. And when we don't think clearly, we make poor choices about how we spend our time, energy, and attention, which is everything we've talked about today: time, energy, and attention. And when we aren't mindful about our time, energy, and attention, it makes us stressed out. It kind of increases the stress. So you think about this cycle that we're in, and everything we talked about today can feel quite, tangible and practical. It's really about starting to lower those stress markers and getting back in front of these patterns that we're falling into. And I'll say that this might require a leap of faith. And the first step is believing that it can get better. And the reason I say this is that for folks who are in a highly anxious state right now, I know some people are coping with this better than others, and some people are really, really struggling right now. And I'll say that when you're in a highly anxious state, the first thing is just believing that this can get better, because it really truly can. But that first 10% is the hardest, and it gets exponentially easier after that. And I'll say that these practices are not a magic pill. They don't work the first time you try them. You don't suddenly feel this big, aha, I'm so relaxed moment, but they will, after a few days, start to work, and you will start to feel different after just a week or two. The good news is that we have, I think right now, a few days or weeks to try this out. So I hope you'll join me with this. And I'll just finish by saying, remember that you are safe in this present moment. And whenever you're feeling like you're spinning out and you're worried about the future, or you're worried about the world or all the things going on, zoom back in as close to the present moment as possible. And we will get through this, and we'll be stronger for it. So I just want to thank the Werk again for this, and you can find them at thewerk.co, and there's a link in their nav to get to the Werk Net. They're doing all sorts of great programming, all sorts of different things, from yoga and Pilates classes to other workshops like this, to music performances, kind of everything right now. It's really cool what they're doing. So go follow them and sign up for the list. And then also, if you'd like to get an email, if you didn't sign up through our email list, we're going to send out an email on Monday with some references that we put in here, links to playlists, links to the meditations, basically the recap of what we talked about. So go to natureofwork.co/new normal and just fill out the form if you haven't already, and we'll make sure you get that. You can find us online at natureofwork.co, and that's our Instagram as well, or you can find me at Steve Rio. And let's open it up to questions. You could either, if you feel comfortable, you could unmute yourself, or maybe just use the chat window, since there's quite a few people on. I'm not sure exactly how many people on, but does anybody have questions they'd like to ask?
I'll take a stab at it, Steve. What was one of the first obstacles that you faced when you were transitioning your business from being something that was in a physical space to then creating a work from home environment for you and your team?
I would say that probably the biggest thing there, let me think for a moment. I think one was figuring out how to recreate and rut the right balance, like recreating that sort of natural in-person dialogue that happens and information that gets passed into an online context. And, we've all turned to things like Slack, but I actually think that the way we're using Slack is really tough. It doesn't really work because we're just getting distracted so much throughout the day. So I'd say one of the biggest challenges that I've faced, and it's ongoing, is how to use tools like Slack, but how to get everybody on the same page about making sure that they know how to turn off notifications when they need to get something done, how to create some times in the day and week when everyone goes offline and just goes to work. So finding a rhythm that everybody can get a sense of and can follow from a remote environment is pretty tough. And the other thing I think is that a lot of communications become very transactional when you get online suddenly. And so things like Slack or email become these one-liners, and you're basically pinging everybody back and forth. And what you often forget is that, we're social beings, and that we really require some social time as well. So, our team has started doing Fridays where a couple times a week actually, but Fridays we just get online and we play like a drawing game together. I forget what it's called, but we just hang out, and it's at the end of the week, and people can have a drink if they feel like it or whatever. But it's really just about creating that social interaction as well. So one of the things though, when we started going online and we moved to Zoom for a lot of our meetings and things like that, is we basically train everybody when we start a meeting, always take a minute to just check in with the person and ask how they're doing, and just see what's going on with learn something about their personal life, or what's going on with them, or how they're feeling that day, or what they're enjoying or struggling with, or whatever, just to humanize the experience as much as possible. Yeah, Drawful. Yasmin says the app we've been playing, there's like a free game called Drawful, which I am terrible at, but you can basically play with multiple people. So you can be on a Zoom call, and then you can basically all log onto this game, and it's like kind of like Pictionary for goofballs.
I have a follow-up. Sorry.
Oh, there's a couple questions just on the chat too. I'll just grab those. Shruti says, you seem in so much peace with yourself. That's nice. How and when did you realize your purpose in life? Is your purpose in life with both your personal goals? Oh, that's a big question. I don't know if I can get to that one today, Shruti. I think my purpose has changed, and our purpose naturally should change, I think, throughout our life. But I think that you find your purpose by creating quiet, by finding time to be alone, to reflect, like really healthy solitude and meditation, and time for reflection. I think the hardest thing for young people in terms of finding purpose is finding the mental space to reflect on what's important to you and what you're really passionate about. I think when you let the pond get very still, the pond of the mind, you go for walks, you meditate, you work work outside. When you do things that are quieting of the mind, and you just listen, you'll find that you have, it's pretty clear what our priorities are often, and what our purpose is underneath all of that. That's a bigger question that I could try and unpack some other time. Shruti says, baby and arm. Thanks. Thank you for the answer. Janice says, many new leaders I work with are spending so much time checking in with their staff, leaders, and colleagues. They end up working evenings or weekends to get their own work done. Any suggestions for these leaders? Yeah, so I think right now what's interesting is that if you've been working in an office environment and you're suddenly working online, it shows in an office environment, it's often easier to not have a clear game plan and what people need to be focused on and working on. And because things, happen more by just osmosis and just by transfer of information with seeing people and bumping into people. And suddenly we realize, oh, I don't have any idea what this person is working on because I can't see them anymore. So I think one of the things is that I think we've been thrown into this, so we're all in reactive mode and we're just basically trying to get as much done. But I think it's important for teams to actually stop right now and spend a half day and get together as a team and think about what the plan is for the next 30 days or however long that feels natural. Maybe it's 2 weeks or something like that, or 30 days, and map that out. And everybody figures out what they're going to commit to and what they're going to do, and then figure out a better rhythm of checking in as a group. So maybe it's a very quick 10-minute group stand-up where everybody jumps on at the same time every day, just to say, I'm working on this today, I need help with that today, that kind of thing. And so just try and bundle it up. But also just to get clearer on what the broader priorities are for people so that you're not necessarily checking in that much. I do think that right now a personal check-in is important. And so that's a bit unavoidable right now. And to also remember that this is not going to have to be going on for forever. But we are just, like, we can't expect to have exactly normal lives right now, but to kind of balance that, I think, with a bit more planning and a bit more just slowing down so that we can move faster. I don't know if that's a super clear answer, but Loretta says, are there particular times of day that work better for meetings versus solo work time? I would say this can differ for different people. However, I would think most generally, earlier in the day for focused work is going to be when you have the most mental energy. Just generally, like if you look at the circadian rhythm and you look at the spike in our cortisol and the way our energy, basically when we wake up, we have a hormone that's released that wakes us up, and it peaks around 11, 12 o'clock. Sometimes it peaks a little later for different people. But if we kind of just generalize that a bit, it sort of peaks and then it starts to valley. And that's why in the afternoon you start to feel a little sluggish, and sometimes people have their second cup of coffee or whatever. So I try to have, if it's a really mission critical meeting, I try to have it early in the day. Otherwise, I try and push them back a little bit and get at least a couple hours of focus time in the morning. That's for me. Other people wake up and they feel like, oh my God, I hate the mornings. And their best focus time is at 4 p.m. And it feels like after they get all their other stuff done, they get 2 hours of focus time. I think the key thing is to see, can you get 1 to 3 hours a day where you are working on single things at a time without distractions and everything is turned off? It's quite incredible, actually. Like for me, if I can get 2 to 3 hours a day of that, I can do more than most people can do in a full day with that 2-3 hours when you just get into that rhythm. So I think it's regardless of when, it's making sure that you're carving it out and you're protecting it. And that might also mean having a conversation with your team about when those times are and see if you can align them. Ideally, everyone between X and X time is offline to do that work. And otherwise, to also communicate, if you have a boss, if you have a manager who wants you to just ping them back instantly all the time, have a conversation about, hey, I'd like to ask you that if I can block out these 2-hour blocks each day at these times, can we all agree to that? And I'm going to just be focused on my work at that time. Is that okay? But I would say most generally the mornings are going to be the best, but for some people it's going to be afternoon, evenings.
I have a quick question, Steve.
Yeah.
First of all, great session. Thank you so much. I got a lot of really great takeaways from it. I work at SFU in a large faculty, and our faculty has created many different social connections for individuals to like help connect that are not meeting related, like Thirsty Thursdays, Lunch Monday, Meditation Tuesday, coffee at 2, tea at 3. But what I'm finding now is now it's like our social connections are also on Zoom, and it's just so exhausting. And the thought of like another Zoom meeting is really, it doesn't actually help me focus on the social connection. And you did speak to it a little bit in your session, like finding more like different ways other than online.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just wondering if you have any tips for people and organizations to develop or maintain some of those social connections that aren't necessarily on like a Zoom call.
Yeah, it's so interesting because normally when I'm talking to people about remote work, one of the first things I say is you got to get away from phone calls and you need to get on video. It's really important to be able to see each other's faces. But right now, to your point, like we have so much screen time that it's like completely overwhelming and it's exhausting. So one of the things that I'm doing is, and I do this regularly anyway, but right now I'm ramping it up, is anytime I have a one-on-one type meeting, or even just like maybe 2 or 3 people, it doesn't really work for group, but for smaller things is doing phone call, like going back to phone calls and using that time to like maybe sit at a window and look out the window, or if I can get outside for a walk, I go and walk while I talk. But I use that, like I think about the socialization as also a way to move around. So even if you're on a call, you can stand up, you can walk around a bit, like you're just relaxing, other parts of your body and your eyes and things like that. So yeah, it's been interesting kind of balancing all these different social events. They don't really translate to online, and they are exhausting. And I think it is minimizing those a bit, like making sure you have maybe one a week, but you don't need 3 or 4 a week. You definitely don't. It's just kind of overwhelming. And then, yeah, so on the more one-to-one and smaller group stuff, to basically, try and move to a phone call and sit in the window or get outside or just sit on your little deck if you got a deck on your apartment or whatever you do, but just change up the environment a bit while you're on that phone call. And I'm taking more notes in my notebook again. So it's just another way, like that's another way that I'm not typing all my notes while I'm on the call. I'm just writing them in a notebook. So just looking for ways that you can get away from the screen.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I know people are going to probably start jumping off here, but is there any other questions in the chat here? I think that's pretty good. What do I eat for breakfast? I don't eat breakfast. I drink decaf coffee. Yeah, and that Amy just said something really sharp. Like I'm currently doing screen-free Sundays to give myself a break. In the nature of work, we recommend that in a big way in general, but right now it's so key to find time in your personal life to get off screens, and more than ever to just get away from that and get to books, get to whatever you can that's offline. And again, at first, like if you're feeling anxious, it actually will make you feel more anxious because it's a pacifier, it's a distraction, but it will really quickly start to feel better. Yeah, and Amy says the day is so expansive. It's so true. When you get off your technology, how much more time suddenly slows way down. It's very interesting how we can actually have a big impact on the how time feels. So what are opportunities for entrepreneurs post-COVID, having experience running their businesses, working from home? See, I think right now what's interesting is there's certain businesses, and I get it, who are just in triage mode trying to save their business because maybe what they do is completely stopped right now due to the lack of being able to be outside or travel or things like that. But for others, this is a real opportunity to see where were we being inefficient in our process and what has changed, what is working better. Like I was talking about earlier, I think one of the things that happens when we're suddenly all working from home is you realize that if you don't have a clear plan on what people are working on, everyone feels like they've disappeared on you. If you have a clear plan, you see documents updating, you see your project management software moving, you kind of just know that things are happening. So I think this is just a real opportunity, to look at the model of our business. So the other thing I'm seeing is a ton of businesses going, oh yeah, I've always thought about what I do being place-based or space-based. Well, what is the online version of this, or what is another way of delivering this that's more versatile? And so I just think it just is opening up new ways to do things, and also to think about how your services might just support people through this time in different ways. So you see this all the time, like you see Earl suddenly doing food delivery, basically like groceries. You can buy packs of meat or packs of vegetables and things like that. So they're serving the community in that way. So just looking for novel ways to stay engaged with their audience and with their community. And in fact, in some cases, I think to grow new audiences, but to also just really look for ways to service and to serve. I think one of the biggest things that's going to come out of this is that we're going to have a new level of expectation for businesses in terms of what are you doing for the community and how are you supporting people's well-being. And you see a lot of people stepping up right now and doing free stuff like on the work and things like that, and offering their services and offering their expertise or offering their coaching. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And I think hopefully it's an exciting shift in terms of that. All right, folks, I think we will wrap this up. But if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us at focus@natureofwork.co. It's an email address, or you can reach us through the form, and we'll be sending out more resources real soon. And thanks everyone. I'm seeing everybody saying bye, so I'll say bye to everybody. See you, Jill. See you, Cam. See you, Chantel. See you, folks. And thanks so much for joining us today. And thank you to the Work for hosting this with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was so insightful. Hope everyone enjoyed it and we got to connect soon. Have a good day.
Bye, folks.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Steve.